It's Wellness Wednesdays. It's Wellness Wednesdays. And I'm going to talk about intents and consequences today. And I had trouble figuring out where to sort of center this discussion because when you start talking about intents, the conversation just becomes an octopus, right? There's tentacles going everywhere. And so I sort of have to start about my theory of communication in this regard because I know that it's an internet thing of intents don't matter, only how it landed mattered. And well, I don't believe that. I don't think that's practical because if you think someone meant no harm, you handle it very differently than if you think somebody was intending to be an asshole, right? So intents do matter. I would say that 50-50 would be too reductive to say intents matter 50%, consequences matter, how it landed matters 50%, because it's almost sort of like this permutation where first exchange, intents and how it landed 50%. After that, there's a self-awareness thing that kicks in. If you get a bad reaction from someone and you keep doubling down on the thing that got you the bad reaction, well, you have to take some responsibility that you just barreled ahead instead of stopping, going, okay, what happened here? Because that surprised me, and recalibrating. So on the first exchange, it's 50-50. After that, it's not that intents matter less, but self-awareness of intents starts going down. And I think that that's because we have this misguided sense that decision-making is always right versus wrong instead of right versus right and wrong versus wrong. Wrong versus wrong decision-making is difficult. It's the whole Kobayashi-Maru test from Star Trek. You got to decide how you're going to fail sometimes. And one of the things I find with a lot of people who get very, very upset with how their intents are being read is that the easiest way to not be misconstrued about your intent is to state your intent. And I've been noticing some exchanges of late that I've been a part of that have completely gone to shit, where someone said, that wasn't my intent, that wasn't my intent, that wasn't my intent, and they just keep talking. What's missing from that? What their intent actually is. Affirmatively presenting this information is important. This is something I had to learn. So my intent here is, not to call anybody out or attack anybody. It's just, look, this is a very common problem and you can correct this now instead of going through more conversations that are unpleasant for everybody. Because I find that those are the conversations that really spile. It goes from not my intent to you're putting intents on me. There are intents here that aren't true. And it's like, my God, you have some control over that. What is your intent here? Next, behave in a manner that is consistent with your stated intent. So if your intent was not to hurt anyone's feelings or come across as attacking them, and you get a message that someone's feelings are hurt and they feel attacked, slow down, maybe even stop. That's the best way to communicate the intents that you claim to have. And that's when the self-awareness comes in. So we're going to get into that, but I'll do the help support this channel. Help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/Leanna K, and like and subscribe to this channel to help me out without spending any money as well. So, self-awareness. There's why we think we're doing something or what our conscious intents are. And then there's all these subscripts running in the background based on our past damage. And people don't like looking at those past things because, it's humbling at best, humiliating or shame-inducing at worst, to acknowledge that there are some emotional reactions we all have to things that affect our behavior and we can't control it. But if we don't recognize those elements and work with them, we're gonna continue to come across in ways we don't intend. And unless we're doing that work, we can't expect other people to be able to understand this, what's going on with us, because we don't understand what's going on with us if we're not factoring that stuff in. And I know there are certain things that just really grind my gears. Not gonna say any of them here because people are cruel and they will use them. And these are things that I cannot help but get an intense fight response from. And there have been a few things lately where people have insisted they meant no harm, but I'll go, okay, cut it out. And they persist. And they continue to up the conflict. And they insist that, for instance, cut it out is demanding an apology. It's not. It is objectively not. I don't need anybody to be sorry, but this needs to stop right now. Like at this point, nobody did anything wrong, but approaching boundary, cut it out. And it's amazing how many people get up in their own feelings and up in their own head and read stuff in because there's this thing about boundaries now. People take them as slights. They take them as some sort of infringement on their freedom, and they're not. When someone tells you, hey, cut this out before I get upset, and you actually, don't want to cause any, bad feelings or anything like that, the smartest thing to do is just stop. And if you don't know what you're doing, go, wait, what's going on here? I do it all the time. And it was funny because I had this exchange with someone, but this is part of the same thing of, I don't like being forced to apologize because this, that, and the next thing, when I just said cut it out. This same person was like, that was not my intention. And I admit I have answers with, I have issues with that response. And a gentleman that I know I've had on the It's Not Therapy podcast who works with men and young men, as he said. So like, adolescents and men. And he says the best way to communicate your intention is to act in accordance with it. So if you had no intention of upsetting someone, show that you care that they're upset. That's the best way to communicate that intention. Going, I didn't intend to upset anyone, and continuing to charge on forward when you see that the person is upset. On some level, you're doing that consciously. And what you're communicating at that point is, especially when it's dealing with women, where there's more social emphasis on being nice, what charging forward like that usually intends to do, that I hear talking from men, is fix the problem. But what it tends to communicate to the other person is that their emotions are the problem that needs fixing, nothing about your behavior. And this is a really easy thing to fix by just slowing down. But for some odd reason, people don't like to slow down. People like to go fast. People like to explain. And people like to speak And people like to be transmitters. People don't like to be receivers. And that has always baffled me, because to me, having more information means that I can make better decisions. Now, I come from a place of being relatively, I have decent self-esteem. I have a clear self-concept. I know what my strengths and weaknesses are. One of my weaknesses is I don't suffer fools. And that's, some people say, well, that's not a weakness. Well, it is when you have to suck shit up to get something done. And so it's just this distress tolerance battle of, well, that was condescending, but don't say anything. Well, that was just flat out rude, but don't say anything. There's only so much I can take of that. And I know other people that are just way better at that than I am. And so I have to really watch those situations and only put myself through so much of that, because eventually my distress tolerance will fail. And there's a time and a place for that. There are other times where it's completely reasonable and appropriate for me to go, you know what? That's bullshit. Cut it out. And it's funny how many people hear that's bullshit and translate it as you're lying. That's not what I mean. That's what I mean about that lack of self-awareness. That what came out of someone's mouth, I think they 100% believe. And it doesn't match what happened at all. And what's baffling to me is when a conversation happened in text and someone can go back and look it up, and they still insist that things happened that didn't happen, or things didn't happen that very much did, when there is clear evidence. That is someone bullshitting themselves. And this is something I had to learn to be very, very diligent about myself because of the PTSD. And this is something that I recognize in order for me to stay healthy, I cannot tolerate, because a big part of the complex trauma at the root of everything that went down was intense gaslighting. Literally, it's right there that I said something and someone would go, no, you didn't. It's right there. And I don't believe most of the time that people are deliberately going, oh, I'm going to really fuck with her. I just think they are so emotionally out over their skis that they can look right at something and see something completely different than what's there, because they're hung up on this game of nothing is ever a mistake. Everything is either I'm a good person or I'm a bad person. And if I make a mistake, then I'm a bad person. And all that guilt and shame that they're sitting on is just bubbling up, and they can't do the smart or even the logical thing. And that's got nothing to do with intelligence. That's got nothing to do with strength. That is a lack of emotional skills and a profound lack of self-compassion. And I see so many people walking around just not feeling those feelings, not acknowledging that guilt and shame is there. And so it's controlling everything they do. I had an instance with somebody who decided to get into a lengthy conversation over text about how he doesn't care about his mental health. He just wants help in his business. And this was somebody I'd been helping, giving Okay, here's my suggestions for what you should do with your businesses based on what you've shown me. And I don't want to talk about my feelings. All we did was talk about my feelings. Not true. The talking about his feelings, I suppose, made him feel vulnerable. And so he forgot the actual business conversation, even though he had an AI chatbot taking minutes of the meeting. And then he said, I need someone to help me organize my businesses, which is exactly what I've been trying to do. This is why mentorship is difficult. Do you know anybody like that? And I said, well, if you didn't like the advice I gave you, anybody I recommend is going to come from the same school of thought, so best of luck to you. And the guy just went off. Something about that was incredibly off-putting to him. I don't know what, because that's a pretty gentle way of going, like, look, it's not that I don't want to help you. It's that you've rejected everything I've told you. So, and you try not to use you statements because they're combative. And this person, I'm uncomfortable. It's like, well, this is a business conversation. What the heck? But I have never disrespected you. He did. When you're telling somebody that they didn't do something they very clearly did, and when you're not even aware of what they're doing and you're treating them as somebody who is just somebody that'll connect them to the good people, not somebody with valuable information in themselves, that's pretty disrespectful. And whether you intended to or not at that point doesn't change the fact that you stepped in it there, And if this is an example of, if your intention is to not disrespect someone, don't continue the disrespect by having an adult tantrum on them. And some people don't like the term adult tantrum, but there is a difference between being upset and still, keeping regulated. You can be upset without being overwhelmed by the upset. And, and that is a lost thing now. And this is something where people really get in their own way. And the minute they kind of explode in this trauma dump, something your ex did to you has no place in a discussion where someone's setting a boundary with you. What people did to you in the past that these people don't even know has no place when someone's setting a boundary with you. They can be super sympathetic to everything you've gone through, but the boundary is still the boundary. You shouldn't be asking someone to just whatever. At that point, you're not being clear about what you're looking for from the conversation. Well, you're just expressing a ton of wounded feelings because you think you're being misconstrued. Well, if your intention is to be better understood, then acting in accordance with that intention and communicating with more efficiency and more clearly. Well, again, the best way to communicate that intention is to behave in accordance with it. Again, for instance, instead of going, not my intent, you're telling me my intent is something it isn't. Oh my God, not my intent. Why are you coming at me? Where's the information of what your intent was? Instead of freaking out, just, my intent was not to upset you. My intent was just to give you the information now and deal with it now so that, yeah, this is a difficult thing to deal with. Let's deal with it when it's small instead of waiting for it to snowball. And then there's way more upset later on, because something you have to accept if you try to do anything even remotely significant is that sometimes people are going to get upset. And you don't mean to, but you don't know what other people are bringing to the table. You don't know what someone else heard. You don't know what someone will interpret. Like, me saying, hey, cut it out, to them reads, you must apologize, which is not what it means to me at all. Saying, come on, that's bullshit, to me is not accusing someone of lying. People treat it as it is. And that particular one is something I'm not willing to let go of, because it's important to my recovery to acknowledge when I'm bullshitting myself. And there's really no good way to say that one, because your self-deluding is really no better. Bullshit is not a lie. Bullshit is bullshit. When people are talking big, fully believing that everybody knows they're full of crap, so no harm done, that's bullshitting. That's not lying. There's no intent to deceive there. If somebody's deceiving themselves, if somebody's deluding themselves, that's not lying. That's bullshitting themselves. It's bullshit. It's a separate category. And I'll explain what I mean by that, and people will go, no, that's not what it means. And it's like, oh, fuck. All right, denial of subjectivity. This conversation is going to go nowhere. And it's amazing how many people get really clear information. Cut that out. Stop this, please. I don't like where this is going. If you continue to use blaming language and make this sound like it's all me and you have absolutely nothing to do with how the way this conversation is going, I am going to stop responding. It's amazing how many people treat these things as attacks and threats. And they are not. They are setting boundaries. They are things that to get anywhere in this world, you have to be able to hear and absorb and adapt to. Because if you don't, you're gonna accidentally bulldoze people. And people don't want to be around that, especially people where, maybe is your boss. The number of people who, I didn't want to upset you. Well, yeah, you kept something from me. Yeah, I know, but you were going to get upset. Well, it's often a self-fulfilling prophecy, because in that case, the thing that I was upset about is that they lied by omission. They hid something. They, waited to get caught instead of saying what was what. And I wouldn't have been upset if they'd come to me and gone, hey, look, this is what's going on. What I got upset about is that they waited to get caught, which means the situation is a much bigger mess and there wasn't the conversation. But to them, it's like, look, see, I knew you'd get upset. Self-fulfilling prophecy. That's somebody bullshitting themselves. And if someone fears change, obviously it's harder to change. If change feels like a failure instead of an improvement, then you're going to be behaving in a set of intents that you're not aware of. Because let's face it, if you feel change, then one of your core intents is to not change, or to change as little as possible. And I know people who are just like, I don't like change. It has to be a lot for me to change. Those people are self-aware, right? Okay, we can work with this. They don't like change. Change is hard. Okay, let's be sympathetic to that and give them a bit more time with some of these changes. With somebody like this, if you force a sudden change on them, you're not going to get a good result. You knew that going in. And sometimes the change has to be sudden anyway, but you have to be prepared for a bit of a meltdown, which is not the same as a tantrum. A bit of a meltdown because you pushed someone into something they told you was going to dysregulate them. Common sense. If your intent is not to dysregulate someone, well, don't push them into that. It's much more honest to go like, look, I know you don't like this. It's a bad situation. I don't really have a choice here. I wish there was another option. That's different than, well, I didn't mean for you to get upset. Some things are just inevitable. People are allowed to be upset with you. People are allowed to tell you to stop doing things. And your bad experiences with people in the past don't absolve you from basic humaning. That person in front of you didn't cause the mommy daddy issues, the damage from your abusive ex, that teacher who was mean to you in school. That person wasn't there, has no direct knowledge of it, and it should not be taken out on the person right in front of you. And that was something that was very, very difficult. It was a stumbling block for me in trauma recovery because I felt like if I wasn't fighting the world every time something felt similar to something in the past, that I was letting that old bully win. And what I finally had to accept is the bully won. Bullying works. Nothing I can do now will change what happened back then. There's no point in trying for a different outcome. It's in the past. And that's a very, very important point of acceptance. And it's painful because you finally have to stop being in denial and feel that sense of powerlessness, that sense of being bullied. And if you don't put that in the right place, then you're going to take it out on people around you now that had nothing to do with that event. And quite frankly, stripped from context, a lot of the things are, they sound, and this is not judging, this is just the reality that I had to accept, that without the greater context of this pattern of abusive behavior, some of the things I had to do don't seem like that big a deal. Having to apologize, say, for one thing that, you didn't really, it didn't go down quite the way the other person is saying, but you just want to sort of let them know that you care. And so sometimes they will insist on an apology and you have to really struggle to find something to be sincerely sorry for. And that happens to everybody. So if you're making a big deal about, I have to apologize for something I didn't do. That happens sometimes in every relationship. And often the person really doesn't want an apology per se. They just want to know that you care, or they want to know it's not their fault. And an adult, caring, non-confrontational conversation can get to the bottom of that. And that's not going to happen if you're on your guard, functioning primarily through aggrievement. It's hard. It is. I'm not saying it's easy. Like I said, this was a major stumbling block in my own recovery. But after the first 20 or so really, really difficult, painful ones where I just felt like I was dying when I had to be the bigger person, it got easier. And I realized that it's much better to not fight every fight Like if someone wants you to apologize for something that is fairly small, my attitude is, yeah, you're right. I overstepped there. Sorry. Because that's not a big deal, right? If they hold that against me, because it is a little thing and it didn't become this big stumbling block, it didn't become this big butting of heads. Well, if they hold that against me, that tells me a lot about them, because people make mistakes. You see what I'm saying? Like, not offering petty resistance yourself lets you see who other people are, and coming at it from this idea of, you know what, this person may not be great for me. Maybe I should step back a little. That is also something that was very hard for me at first. I didn't want to reject people because I had a lot of rejection in my life and I didn't want to do that to others. But what I realized is that I didn't deserve the rejection I got. If I have told someone the problem, told them how to do things differently so that they can get a better result, I say that multiple times and they don't, well, they're rejecting the correction. So I can choose to not continue to associate. That is absolutely fair. What I eventually realized was that what was bothering me was not the rejection per se, because logically I recognized everybody has to go through that sometimes. What was sticking with me was a sense of unfairness that nobody told me the thing that was apparently the big problem. And if someone had, I could have fixed it. They chose not to. And that's the adjustment I had to make, is that I will have the tough conversation. I will be the bitch and go, hey, cut that out. Or, and that's very clear. I won't go, I don't like this. I don't like the word bitch. It's been weaponized against me too many times because I'm assertive. But I won't say stop saying it. I will say, I don't like that word and this is why. And I really appreciate whenever somebody says, I know you don't like that word. All right, there's consideration. That's what I'm looking for. I'm not going to ban a word. If I don't say apologize, I don't mean apologize. If I don't say stop that, I don't mean stop that. There are green lights, yellow lights, and red lights, right? I also say what the green lights are. I prefer this word, or my intention is not that, it is this. I give people active information, and I do that because then if I have to walk away, they had every chance to change that outcome. They were given the power, they were given the control, they were given the tools and the materials to get a better outcome multiple times, and they chose not to. That is what I wanted. That's what I didn't get. And that's what led to me being horribly traumatized. Among other things, there was physical violence and stuff like that as well. It was a continuum of things. But that's what I didn't get. And that's what I needed. Not to never be rejected ever. That's not reasonable. It's not even good, right? Because being rejected yourself makes you more compassionate to other people. Going through difficult stuff means you can be there for other people going through difficult stuff. It's not a bad thing. But because I did that healing and I owned when things hurt and I didn't bat it away or deny it, my intentions are, nobody's perfect, but aligned at least 80% with my actions. Every so often it's like, why did I behave that way? And it's usually because I just couldn't swallow any more bullshit. I couldn't swallow one more slight. I couldn't swallow one more insult. Intentionally or not, I have worked too hard and taken too many lumps to be disrespected and be treated like some dumb coffee girl when I know shit. And I tend to be good at predicting where things are going to go. Again, not perfect. But I have meaningful knowledge. I have made the exact same mistakes I see other people making. And one of the things I have learned is that nobody's coming to save you. You have to save yourself. And that is not a bad thing because it is possible. And I'm not talking about, a 12-year-old kid who's being abused by his parents. That person needs help, normally doesn't get it. I lived through it. The system is often powerless below a certain threshold. And the things that really linger with people is the emotional abuse. Because, when my dad used to hit me, that's easy to say. That was wrong. It's the more subjective stuff. It's the more he did his best stuff. That, no, it was wrong. I know the impact it had. When a child is crying and you continue to scream at them for 3 days, like it was seriously, I'd go to school zombified, come back the minute either he or I walked in the door, he'd start on me again and keep me up till 2 a.m. And then I'd get up at 6:30 in the morning to go to school and it would happen again. And people with this particular anger problem, it seems to take 2 to 3 days before they can calm down. It's not normal, healthy anger. It is not regulated. My father was taking out his misery on the world on his kid. And if you asked him, no, she just needs discipline. She needs to learn to control her emotions. I heard that my entire goddamn formative years. You can't. You can't control your emotions. You can influence your emotions. You can control your reactions to your emotions, but emotions happen faster than thought. They can't be controlled. So I had to unlearn a lie that was screamed at me my entire childhood. So yeah, when people start behaving in some of the psychologically manipulative ways my father did, I have a strong reaction. I can't control that. I can control how I behave based on that reaction. And so I give people a couple chances. And if they don't cut it out, thank you, next. And that's fair. Same rules apply to everyone. So if your intention is not to hurt and you see someone hurting, slow down. Find out why. That's the best way to communicate your intention. If your intention is to not be disrespectful and a person feels disrespected, it doesn't mean you did it on purpose. It doesn't even mean you did it at all. Stop, find out why. Because for your intentions to matter, the other person's intentions have to matter. If you want them to care about your feelings of upset, of fear and panic and whatever, even anger, that you think you're being ascribed false intentions, then you got to care about the other person's feelings too. It's the only way it works. If you're sitting there going, I didn't mean to, you're having an adult tantrum. And it's very likely rooted in trauma. Get it checked. Deal with it. It is possible. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Or buy a one-time Leanna Cares session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/LeannaK. Like and subscribe to this channel as well to support me without paying any monies. The money helps me a lot. Thanks for watching and be well.